Hi, today we are going to talk about brands, because we buy brands, especially when it comes to startups. We all think that some functional aspect is very important, that we come up with rational advantages, but in the end, when competitors appear, people choose what is closer to them in terms of values and spirit. Therefore, if we don't engage in branding, maybe not at the very early stage, but don't engage in it at all, we will eventually end up on the sidelines.
I would add from my side that if you are not a deep tech company that will make a breakthrough in 10 years, and this will happen in 10 years, as they say, regardless, then what I will say is that everything you come up with will be immediately copied by your competitors, and their learning path will be much shorter. They will just replicate it. The only thing that will likely set you apart is not necessarily the user benefits or the utility of your product, but the image that forms around your product, how people perceive you. And most likely, this will be due to the values you convey.
There is a concept of brand personality, meaning the personality of a brand. We choose brands that are similar to us in spirit. For example, take Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Most basic example. They are absolutely identical products with no real benefit, yet we buy them. Some people are passionate about Coca-Cola, while others prefer Pepsi. This is because through communication, different personalities are conveyed to us. We feel different values, different characters. One brand feels closer to us, while the other does not. That's it. Even though the product can be absolutely identical. But when it comes to startups, it's a bit different. There, you can differentiate some rational things, but you still need to complement them with emotions. Because we are emotional beings, we first choose emotionally and then logically explain to ourselves why we made that choice. Nowadays, it often happens that we make a decision within the first few seconds and then justify it to ourselves with reasons like functionality, price, or something else. Therefore, emotions are what need to be addressed. It's not just about shaping the consumer experience, but also the emotional one.
But what should a startup do when entering a completely new, unfamiliar market with a totally different culture, and they have no idea what emotions people experience there and why?
In any market, even if it seems that the market is clear, you need to research. I had a situation where there were 4 projects in an absolutely identical niche. These were not startups. These were investment schools. This topic is popular now. It would seem that they essentially have the same product, but we researched the audience and they already had their own audience some people were buying. In general, I would actually turn to branding when you are already selling a little. That is, you already have some understanding of who these people are, and you have someone to get feedback from. And we looked into it, resulting in slightly different segments, sometimes a family. Couple, sometimes more tech-savvy guys, so there was something to latch onto. And we found their different values, built positioning around them, created the brand image, and then packaged the business.
A classic study that is used in marketing or is close to customer development, right? But basically, there's nothing new here. Some kind of super secret study, a secret study.
And yes, a lot has changed in terms of communication and advertising in recent years, but the research has essentially remained the same. Sometimes more in-depth research is needed, such as conducting a focus group or 10 interviews to dig into why people really want this product. Not because let's take some task manager, organizes everything, but because a person wants to spend more time with their family, for example, or simply because they want to have fun coming to work and enjoy their time. That is, to find that deep-seated motive around which a brand can be built.
Deep motive. Look, can you give an example of a situation where a project entered a highly competitive market, where there were already similar services or products, and started gaining market share by differentiating based on values through this deep motive?
Probably can't say right off the bat, but I had an interesting observation, again from a similar market, also investments for some reason. There was a startup there, and as far as I understand, they are just launching now. Serviceware. Investors plan their investments, roughly speaking, and we conducted several interviews. While the client conducted them, I made a questionnaire for them. Turned out that in other words, they had one perception of their customer, that he just wants to organize everything, so on. Turned out that we talked to users, and for them, investments and the ability to plan strategies are like a sport. And they were young. They enjoyed playing computer games. And now they are over 40, and they have this kind of game for adults, for big boys to outdo their own strategy, to outplay themselves or another person, to share with another investor how they came up with an idea and earned a certain amount. Deep motive is like a game, and you can build communication on it. In some cases, we establish a brand by adopting certain values, while in others, we simply create engaging communication and connect through it.
How long does it take to build a brand? Is it a one-time effort, or does it take years? Years. Where is that golden mean? Because it is clear that a brand is built probably from the moment of the product idea and throughout its entire life. Kind of evolves, or rather, it evolves and is maintained. But the actual formation of a brand, where we can say, that's it, the brand is formed, Is it a year, 5, 10 years?
This needs to be asked to the consumer. We ask the client, tell us, when we mention a company, what associations do you have? What do you know? If a person identifies what we intended, it means the brand was successful.
And if he names something else from what we intended, the brand was created, not the one we wanted.
Yes, so we don't have, well, a brand is, once again, there are many definitions. I like the definition that a brand is when the consumer understands the brand as we intended. Hard to say, again, it all depends on the market. You definitely can't create a brand in a month, and probably not in 6 months either. It is very difficult to establish this communication. There needs to be a certain repetition of specific messages so that people retain an understanding of who we are. Plus, all these communications must be supported by the product, they must be supported by the service, and so on. So, if we claim that we are, a tech-savvy, young, and fun company, it should be reflected in every detail. And all these things need to be worked through. A person needs to come into contact with them several times, make sure that yes, they are forming an image, and in the end, if we ask them in a year or 3, depending on how often they interact with the brand, if they say, yes, I know what this is about, then it has worked.
What do you think is the most difficult part of building a brand?
Well, the most difficult and truly the most responsible task is to understand a person's mind and how to differentiate from specifics. That is, on one hand, we study the consumer, our client, to understand what they live for, their lifestyle, and their overall life priorities. We research competitors, we look at where we can, differentiate ourselves, how not to overlap. As competitors, everything is more or less clear, we see, everything transparently in communication. With clients, you sometimes need to try different approaches. Sometimes one type of research doesn't work out. Mistakes are made, and you need to try a different way, you need to test. It's no wonder we often see some not very successful communications from various large brands because they test and see that, oops, didn't work very well for their reputation this time, we made a bit of a mistake. Got a bit too enthusiastic, it came out too experimental. That's how it gets sorted out over time. Yes, but research is the most crucial part. If we made some mistakes at the beginning and didn't understand our audience, we simply won't be able to build.
I don't know if you have had experience working specifically with investors who buy companies, but from your point of view, how does having a properly established brand affect the company's value when evaluated by investors?
Well, I haven't worked directly with investors, but as far as I know, yes, the brand is not the most important thing they evaluate. But what does it influence? Brand is a tangible asset, right? The company. That is, when evaluating or even selling a business, they assess, among other things, the content, trademarks, and so on. That is, if we are selling some business and there is a large company like Apple, its factories probably aren't as valuable as its brand, meaning its tangible assets. I think that when evaluating startup, they try to understand how much it can generate, revenue in the future, and what accumulates revenue, among other things, is the presence of a brand, a strong brand.
Let me ask differently. Look, if a brand is communication and a certain image or perception, and how can its value be calculated?
The value of a brand is a very complex story, how to calculate it, but in evaluation, that is, returning to the question if that is, a brand essentially helps us earn more. In other words, a brand is the premium that a person is willing to pay. In HR branding, on the contrary, it is about how much less employees are willing to earn if they work for this company calculating this. Premium is actually very difficult. Again, research needs to be conducted. There are different formulas, but I wouldn't say that you take just one, calculate it, and that's it, as we know. Each one, after all, touches on dissatisfaction, which everyone considers in their own way. They probably have their own patented formula over there. But at a certain stage, you need to count, at least roughly estimate. No one can calculate it exactly. Very subjective.
Listen, well, I'll share our experience. Maybe it's not the most illustrative, but we sell some of our services, like Relicode, at a higher price than competitors, precisely because we have shaped the perception of our team in the way we want to shape it. As experienced consultants who will not only address migration issues, but also help attract investments, optimize taxes, and build a business in this country, and this is kind of our delta. It is clear that we still want to work for a long time and have been working with some clients for 7 years already, and we earn together, both the client and we earn. This initial entry point, our price is higher than that of competitors.
Branding, and the same thing works. Why do some consultants earn more, charge per hour because they work on their brand? They have a clear brand, we know.
But with consultants, not everything is clear, especially legal ones. You took on more court cases, your check increased. Lost court cases, it didn't increase.
Well, yes, there are consultants with a certain image, more well-known, more controversial, and so on.
How often are brands actually really built in a truly thought-provoking way? Or is this an isolated case?
The larger the market, the more cautious you probably need to be with provocations. If you choose a narrow segment, especially if it's young people, an audience that loves jokes and experiments, then it might be possible.
And considering this new generation, I see that many brands are experimenting. Their colors are changing, their tone is changing, their messages are completely changing. In other words, everything is being adjusted for the younger generations. What are the 2 or 3 most prominent trends you know of right now?
Sustainability, yes, at the very least. New generation sustainability.
Sustainability. Okay.
So it's really super important. I mean, even if we look at, McDonald's, it's all orange, yellow, red, kind of loud and all. Now, it's also green. Sustainability is indeed extremely important, especially for the new generation, which, well, obviously has a more short attention span mindset, meaning not complex stories, but more TikTok-like, something very quick, catchy, and unobtrusive. That's probably one of the trends.
Please tell me, if we take a startup that it needs to enter a completely new market, Southeast Asia, or Britain or somewhere else, how would you approach studying this new culture? Will this research be significantly different, fundamentally different from researching the Russian audience? What will change?
Well, if it's a startup, that will only exist in Asia. It's one thing. If it's any global brand, it works in other markets one way or another. It adapts. That is, the brand itself does not change. If we say that a brand is character, style, image, value, and so on, it does not change, its communication changes. That is, if we are entering, say, the Emirates, our communication there might be a bit more, perhaps restrained.
Skyeng has entered the Asian market, but under a completely different name. Is this an adaptation or a rebranding? Completely different name.
Well, if it's a completely different name, then it's a different brand. Sometimes a brand is changed simply because it doesn't sound quite right, or translates poorly in the local language. And if he completely changed both the name and the logo, I just haven't seen what it looks like. Maybe he just launched a new brand, he entered a new market with a new brand.
But the essence of the products has not changed.
But again, you need to study the audience. That is, if we are talking about, the same brand in America, it will communicate differently, even within different parts of America. If we go to California, especially in June, during what they call Pride Month, I think when there are all the gay parades and so on. So Nike has all of their stores decorated in rainbow colors because it's important and socially responsible. You won't see something like that in Texas, though. So communication is adapted. At the same time, the brand's values, its character, its personality, they haven't gone anywhere. They have remained the same. So they research, they study the local audience, they understand, they see the context, right, what the demands are, and they adapt. But if we understand that what we need, that is, our baggage, our brand, basically doesn't fit this market, we simply launch under a new brand. Well, sometimes it's easier that way.
Can you tell an interesting story about the most striking and interesting case with which brand you worked abroad and something that you liked, remembered for some reason, something you would like to share?
I have a regular client in Pennsylvania, and he is opening several restaurants. I was simply surprised when we were conducting research in the audience, it seemed like a cigar bar. It's clear who probably goes to cigar bars. I was surprised when he started listing that we have doctors, some mechanics. So on coming in, I was like, what? So in America, these are people who earn well and can afford it. And there are no significant cultural differences. People treat each other with tolerance. Plumber can come to a fancy bar in his work clothes, sit next to a lawyer, and they will have a normal conversation about politics. And everyone will be fine. These points were very interesting. It was necessary to understand how to use them and what image to create. This is a completely different story, of course, in B2C. In terms of technology, I was very surprised. I had a project with my former colleague who also lives in America now. He launched a tech product. I have a studio called Brand2Go. We do business packaging. Branding. These are somewhat two different stories. Packaging a business is like creating a website, defining who we are, roughly positioning, design, and so on. Usually, this is needed in the first year or two to get started and begin earning. Branding usually matures later, but he came in right away. With such confidence in his product, which really impressed me. It's great when that happens. He saw that there weren't many competitors yet, that now was the time to enter the market without hesitation, and that it was necessary to do things excellently right away to stand out from other players. There is a risk that the technological features he wants to adopt could be copied by others. Then what would be left? It will remain. Cool brand. They seem to have launched in January, so I'll be keeping an eye on how they do.
Yes, great story. Thank you very much. Please tell me one last question. Is there a fundamental difference between building a brand for a large non-tech corporation and a small tech startup? It seems like it works differently. Will the principles of operation be the same?
I just went to another one. Topic is basically the same. Everything starts with research. I repeat this many times. Different budgets are simply needed. Large company can target a niche market, but it depends on the company's goals. First, you need to understand what it wants, what kind of money it wants to make, and in which market, but the sequence is roughly the same.
What is the difference between a restaurant and a technology company?
Maybe in technologies, there might be slightly more rational qualities, some advantage, yes. Maybe in a restaurant, it will be more emotional, but in reality, there is also something to differentiate from competitors. I feel these restaurants, it's all the same, the food, the waiters, the service. There is still something to stand out from, and there perhaps a bit more. Can definitely be applied using tools like experiential marketing, where a person is absolutely astonished by certain characteristics right from the start. In fact, I think technological products can also try to borrow something, maybe not fully, where it will be more important, I don't know, like partnership marketing, considering building some long-term loyalty story, a loyalty system, and so on. In technology, it might not be as important. The more diverse the market you work with, the more interesting it actually becomes to sometimes cross-pollinate and unexpectedly apply something from one to another.
Is there any fundamental difference that you noticed in working in the Russian market compared to the American market? The example about the cigar club was great. It seems very illustrative to me, mixing, that is, it's not hard to imagine it in some other culture. Maybe there's something else.
Well, there are various moments, like in social networks, for example. In America, they use Facebook more. Instagram is not as popular. But we immediately made a website, made a Facebook page, and even the website wasn't that important. Everything was on Facebook. In Russia, the spectrum is a bit wider, so here in Russia, we immediately have Telegram. But again, it has a specific audience, not for everyone. That's it. I guess in general, what really surprised me is that I spent a lot of time in America, probably almost half a year or maybe half a year, and actually the demand for aesthetics is not that high there, especially in small towns. So when you live, let's say my base is in St. Petersburg, and you get used to good design, everything stylish from Europe, and then you expect something similar, but in reality, people there have a simpler attitude towards all of this. That is, maybe they were once at the forefront in terms of both marketing and design, but now in some cities, we can see things that make it possible to be the best with our design, even if it's just a 4 out of 10. This was surprising to me.
That's great. It means there are good prospects for competing with local players, because something needs to surprise. There is something to surprise with. Main question would be, because if the population, we worked a lot with Spain, many projects came to us saying, listen, Spain doesn't have this thing, Spain doesn't have that thing, now we will come and do it. Tell them, no, Spaniards simply don't need it. They are different, just don't need it right now. Maybe in a couple of years, in 10 years, something will change. Spaniards, they are different. And in any culture, in any country, it is very important to understand that some things the market is just not ready for yet.